Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today, obviously, by what the title says, I'm going to be reading a scary story. And it is from Reddit. The link will, of course, be down in the description box below. And it is Don't Go Into the Treehouse. And it says sexual violence, so here's your warning, your disclaimer. Caution, caution, if you don't want to listen about sexual violence, apparently. And I will be looking off this way a lot. And also, if I'm squinting, it's because I have no earthly idea where I put my glasses. And I'm a bit too lazy to go and look everywhere. So I'm just going to survive without them. It's not going to be that big a deal, but I'm probably just going to be squinting a little bit. So sorry about that. So let's just jump right into it. Okay. Don't go into the treehouse. It was the first thing Maddie ever said to me. We met at McCormick Middle School. It was my first day and I was new to the area. So everyone else found the friends they had made in elementary school and immediately formed tightly knit cliques. I stood in the hallway alone, watching the blurs of my happy peers swarm around me, isolating me farther. I looked down at a thin piece of a gray-white paper in my hand. Second period, 6th grade literature, Miss Cadwell, room E312. The cardboard paper folder Miss Stephen, the guidance counselor, had given me was in the crook of my elbow, and I scanned the map of the school printed in blue ink on the back. A plastic sign with the letter A hung above me. Hall E didn't seem too far, but were the 300s to the right or the left? After getting lost twice, I jogged through the door of my second period English class just as the tardy bell rang through the mostly empty halls. I collapsed into a desk right inside the doorway, bagging my elbows against the metal bar that connected the seat with the attached desktop. I bit down on the inside of my lower lip in an attempt to hide the pain, uncomfortably aware of the loud sound I had made and many eyes that now lay upon me. A heavyset woman in her early 40s stood from the large desk at the corner of the classroom. Her thin gray hair was dyed a Jurassic orangey red, while inch-long silver roots sharply contrasted with the fake color. She walked towards the door of the classroom and turned towards me, my heart pounding hard in my chest. She lifted her hand and using a worn wooden ruler pointed to the whiteboard behind her. There, a meticulous seating arrangement had been drawn. On the square that presented the desk by the door, the desk I now sat in, was the name George Henderson in neat red lettering. My cheeks burned as I scored on the chart on the wall as fast as I could, trying to find my name. I could feel everyone watching me, judging me for being an outsider, not for knowing the particularities of Miss Cadwell long before graduating the 5th grade. It was taking me way too long to find myself when my eyes caught it. Lindsey Graham. I looked across the room, ignoring the many eyes turned my way, and found the empty desk met for me at the back corner of the room. I hunched my shoulders up to my ears in an attempt to make myself as small as possible. I navigated the narrow path to my correct seat. I sat and tried to breathe deeply to calm my frail nerves, or to at least look calm to the room of middle schoolers around me. Mrs. Caldwell cleared her throat and began to introduction to 6th grade literature. The interest of my peers waned, they quickly forgot about the awkward new girl, yet I still felt eyes on me. I turned, and beside me was a petite girl in a black shirt and black baggy pants. Her eye makeup was heavy and dark, and her lips were dark purple, and she was looking at me. We stared at each other for a moment before she turned her face downwards to her desk and a spiral notebook in front of her. She quickly scribbled something and handed me the sheet of paper. On the sheet of lined paper she had written, "Hi, I'm Maddie." I blinked, not really understanding. I looked up at her, and she was staring at me again, but this time the corner of her lips were turned into a small smile. I waved at her timidly, returning the smile. It was nice to have a friend. What treehouse? I asked, startled by the sudden interaction. My square piece of pizza, lukewarm with cheese colgating in the grotesque shapes. I sat at the plastic tabletop in front of me. You just moved into 220 Hedge Road, right? Yeah, I said, saying the word as a question instead of a statement. I'm your neighbor. My family lives at 218, the red house. There's a tree house in the woods behind us. Don't go in it. Why not? I asked. Because Mr. Itch lives there. We sat at the round lunch table, the other 5 chairs remaining empty. I took a sip from my chocolate milk and looked up at the bare sky above us. The clouds stood motionless, heavy and thick. I looked around. The outdoor section of the cafeteria was full. The day too overcast, too drawn in a crowd. Maddie picked up a French fry, examined it, and then shoved it in her mouth. Who's Mr. Itch? I asked, unsure whether my new friend was an appropriate choice. I figured that my only friend at my new school would be insane. Maddie's eyes skipped to mine as she held another fry aloft. Her voice was low. Someone bad. Someone you don't want to meet. At home, my mother asked if I had made any new friends. I thought a moment before responding. Sort of. My mother continued cutting vegetables without looking up. How does one sort of make a friend? She asked, her rich voice light with amusement. I'll let you know when I figure it out. Maddie and I had lunch every day that week. She was an odd girl, but she was friendly and smart and easy to talk to. So by Friday, I indeed thought of her as a friend. I woke up Saturday morning with an urge to explore the woods out back. I wasn't intending to defy Maddie's warning, but she had made me curious to see if there was even a treehouse back behind our houses. The air was cool, crisp with a slight fall breeze. I pulled up my denim jacket and headed out. The woods behind our house were sparse, each tree several feet away from any of its neighbors. Yet the woods was deep enough that one couldn't see more than 10 feet without obstruction. I stood at the edge, looking in, digesting the sight slowly, like masticating a thick piece of meat. Red pine needles covered the ground in a thick carpet, and the bare branches of the trees stretched high above me. Looking back behind my shoulders, the blue-gray wood of our new home looked dark, but not necessarily uninviting. The windows were too dark to make out any person or anything inside, making the house appear empty, void of warmth and light. But it was not cold. I liked our house. It seemed to have a wisdom to it, a knowledge that only homes that have stood for some time can possess. I faced the woods once again and stepped forward. The pines crackled and crunched beneath my boots. The woods felt deserted. I didn't see another living creature as I explored. Soon I reached a decent-sized stream, almost a small river, that gurgled lazily past me. Large rocks lined the sides. I couldn't see a convenient way to cross. The stones away from the riverbanks were covered with quick-moving water, making them non-transversible. I looked around and saw a tree trunk that had fallen across both sides of the water 20 feet or so down the stream. As I approached it, I realized that it was a log that had been cut in two, the halves laid side by side to form a narrow bridge. It didn't look new, but it also didn't look particularly old. I followed the tree trunk and then continued straight, reasoning that the bridge was put there for a reason. My hunch proved correct as I stepped into a small clearing. A squat tree stood in the middle, stood as the wrong term, more like crouched. On its thick branches rested an old treehouse, approximately 5 or so feet above my head. The wood was stained from years of rain and snow. Slats had been nailed into the trunk and led to a small trap door in the floor above. The clearing was quiet, still, and even a faint breeze. The indistinct smell of musk hung in the air, which tickled at my nostrils. I scrunched my nose instinctively and took another few steps towards the treehouse. The smell grew stronger as I approached, reaching out a hand to rub the tree's bark. It was surprisingly smooth to the touch as I stroked the tree, relishing the feeling of it beneath my fingertips. The musk around me was interrupted by a new smell, something more floral, or maybe even more woodly. I couldn't tell. A shiver ran down my spine as I slowly backed away from the tree. Something was wrong. Something wasn't right about it. I groaned immense above my head, neither human nor the groan of weighted wood. I turned and briskly walked away, Maddie's warnings echoing through my brain, the smell of wood and earth following me all the way back to my new home. Now more comforting than ever. A month later, I'd forgotten all about the treehouse and was beginning to adjust to my new life. Maddie and I had started to have weekly sleepovers, each of our homes providing to be both alien and exciting to the other. Maddie's house was pure chaos, especially compared to my own. I don't have any siblings, and both of my parents are academics, so our house has always been full of books and warm quiet. Maddie, on the other hand, is one of 5, all louder than the previous child, it seemed. Maddie's younger brothers, identical twins named Stephen and Brad, seemed to make a hobby of running from one floor to the other, screaming at the top of their lungs. The house was loud but cozy. At dinner time, all 9 of us sat around a large, round dining room table, the home-cooked meal that Maddie's mother made spread out before us. Maddie's brother and sisters would fill the air with ideas and events, troubles and successes. Maddie's mom made a point to include me, asking about my interests, what subjects at school was my favorite, what subjects I hated. Like her mother, unlike my mother, who was tall and lanky, slow-speaking, and methodically with cold, still gray eyes that scrutinized every detail, Mrs. Harris was short and stout, quick-tongued with laughter, so it seemed to engulf her whole being. Her voice was high and with constant excitement, almost in a manic frenzy. Questions and answers piled on top of each other, leaving the other party little rooms to respond. Her eyes were bright, warm brown, the edges of which constantly wrinkled with her wide smile. I'd answer her questions and nod her responses and suggestions. She'd tell me how she loved Jane Eyre at my age, scold Stevie to stop cooking Maddie's younger sister Lena, and asked me if I was enjoying my mashed potatoes all in one breath. Maddie was the second oldest. Her brother Tim was 5 years older than her. The first time I stayed with her, I couldn't help but notice how handsome he was. He had brown stubble curls that framed his long face, dark stubble cast a light shadow down his long jawline and across his high cheekbones. His brown eyes were clear and focused. They weren't the warm eyes of his mother, but were colder, revealing confidence and power he took from many things. He didn't look at things, but instead stared with a great intensity, as if scrutinizing everything, trying to see breath in the skin, the image into the depth of something essence. I wanted him to look at me with that intent stare. I wanted him to touch me, to kiss me, to want me. But he paid little attention to me. I blamed my young age, my lack of curves, of breasts. I felt ugly and young, sitting at the dining room table across from him that very first night as he shoveled forkfuls of food into his mouth, heavily engrossed in his novel. I was painfully aware of my mousy hair and heavily freckled face, still round with youth. After dinner, Tim went straight up to his room, barely saying a word to any of his family members. Maddie and I spent the evening eating popcorns and Oreos while watching rom-coms with Mrs. Harris. It was an exciting evening, but I loved every second of it. The friendship, the camaraderie, At 11, I set up my sleeping bag on Maddie's floor. It wasn't long before I heard faint snores coming from Maddie's bed. As I lay there, I realized that my mouth was dry and uncomfortable, probably from all the junk food we ate. I thought I slowly got out of my bag, carefully not to let the nylon shell rustle with the movement, and made my way down to the kitchen. As I passed the living room, I noticed him sitting on the couch watching television. The room's lights were off, and the flickering screen cast blue and black shapes across his face and chest. My cheeks grew red. When I was realizing he was wearing nothing but a pair of plaid boxers. I didn't notice he'd stopped until Jim jerked his head towards the doorway where I was standing frozen in place. I was suddenly horrified, self-conscious of my pink-yellow kitty pajamas. Tim's brown eye drilled into me, his face expressionless. He stared blank out, penetrating slowly. He pushed himself from the couch and approached me. His long limbs hung down loosely. His body relaxed, yet his gaze was firm and holding, his eyes not leaving mine. My eyes were open wide with an absolute horror, stuck in place without apparent need to blink. An attractive, mostly naked teenage boy was approaching me, staring straight at me. I tried to quell the tremble that threatened to run through my frail body as he reached me. He stood tall in front of me, and I craned my neck to look up at his face, ignoring the chest hair that covered the front of his torso directly in front of me. He continued to stare into me as if he was trying to see something hidden behind my skin, under my face. He leaned towards me, and I thought I would lose control of my bladder. I wasn't ready for this. I didn't know what to do or what was going on, but I knew that the fear echoing inside of making my insides feel empty and far away wasn't right. Whatever this was, this closeness, this intimacy, it wasn't healthy. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was wrong. His lips stopped behind my ear, his breath warm and moist against my skin, causing my flesh to prickle. "Boo," he whispered. I turned on my heels and ran up the stairs, taking 2 steps at a time until I reached Maddie's room. I ran in and slammed the door, my heart pounding, tears forming at the corner of my eyes. Maddie groaned and turned, but did not wake. Curling back up into my sleeping bag, hugging my knees to my chest, I shook with a memory that both frightened and excited me. I avoided Tim from then on. Part of me was still attracted to him, even more so from a bizarre encounter, but I preferred to admire him at a distance, to think of him and to replay that night. But the idea of talking to him or having his eyes on me again caused my stomach to twist. He was better at fantasy than reality. As the school year continued, I found my heart fluttering for other boys in my grade, and I even went to the school dance with Matt Rickson. Maddie and I continued to have regular sleepovers at each other's homes, but I was able to keep a distance from Tim that made me forget him. Almost. It was late one night. Me and Maddie had been watching slasher films at her place. Maddie had fallen asleep, was snoring peacefully beside me as I watched the final girl run through the woods, tripping over branches, her white shirt brown with mud. I ripped to expose her moist flesh, cut and ripped by man-made tools and nature-like. The film ended with dawn breaking over the untamed southern landscape. Our heroine, only powerful in her ability to not die throughout the night, hopping to the back of an unexpected farm truck. As the credits ended, the room fell into an uncomfortable darkness. Still not totally familiar or comfortable with my surroundings, I sat there, unsure of what to do while my friend slept beside me. "Maddie?" My voice was small and timid in the empty air. Her snoring continued. I heard a noise in the hallway and looked, squinting my eyes to try and see through the darkness. A light turned on down the hallway, slightly illuminating the space around me. I stood and followed to the kitchen. The fridge door was open. "Miss Harris?" A lanky figure, his cold eyes piercing me instantly. I froze. He smiled. "Hey, Lindsay." he said, his voice dripping my name out as if I were a bloated, heavy liquid. I swallowed. Hi, Tim. He closed the fridge door lazily. What are you doing up so late? The clock on the kitchen wall beside me read 2 a.m. Just watching movies, I shrugged, trying to make the gesture seem nonchalant. I'm going to head to bed now, I added, sliding my back foot past the kitchen barrier. Wait, Tim said, command disgusted by a charming half-grin. He walked towards me, his stare gulling my feet to the floor. Something about the way he looked at me terrified me. I imagined it how wolves look at a lamb. When he was standing in front of me, his chest only inches away from mine, he asked, Do you want to hear about Mr. Itch? The name rang in my ear. I remembered the first conversation I ever had with Maddie months before. Don't go into the treehouse. Why not? Because Mr. Itch lives there. I shook my head, taking a step back away from Tim. Tim reached out a hand and firmly grasped my upper arm. A small whimper escaped my lips, and I tried to take another step back, but Tim tightened his hold. Has Maddie told you about Mr. Itch? He asked. I nodded slowly. I bet she told you he lives in the treehouse. I pulled my arm away again. His hand remained tight around me. I looked back down the hall towards the dark living room. I knew I should yell out for help, but my throat was too tight. My instincts to be quiet at night, to not wake anyone up, keeping me silent even though I knew I shouldn't be. Once again, Tim moved his lips to my ear and whispered, Sometimes Mr. Itch leaves the treehouse. His red throat scratching against my skin, hot tears welled in the corner of my eyes. Mr. Itch likes the little girls, and sometimes Mr. Itch leaves the treehouse to come and get them. His arms wrapped around me, pulling me up against him. I tried to push him away, but he was too strong. I felt something move by his leg, and I screamed to get away from it. It felt like something really, really bad, something I didn't want to touch me. Tim! Maddie's voice broke through around us like shattering glass. Tim let go of me, and I ran back to Maddie, who hugged me protectively while glaring at her brother. My head was buried in my friend's shoulders, but I could hear Tim snort as laughter caught in his nose. I felt heavy presence pass beside his footsteps, growing faint as he climbed the stairs toward his room. We only had sleepers at my house after that. The air hung heavy with the crisp autumn air. Trees were painted with every shade of red and yellow that nature had to offer. It was Friday, and like clockwork, Maddie was on my front porch at 6 p.m. My mother and I greeted her warmly. I had been taking some time for my mom to get used to Maddie's thick black eyeliner and dark lipstick, the studs and buckles, but she had grown to know and love this sweet girl beneath all that black. We were an odd couple of sorts. I wore knit sweaters and plaid skirts, thick stockings, and Mary Jane's well. Maddie looked like she had just stepped out of Hot Topic after a shopping spree. But we loved each other like sisters. That night I woke suddenly. My bed was comfortable and warm from my body heat. I turned, pulling the covers tight around my shoulders, determined to close my eyes and drift off to sleep once again. Then I realized what was off in the room. What awakened me? I couldn't hear Maddie's breathing. I opened my eyes and peered over to the edge of the bed. Maddie's sleeping bed was empty. Flat against the carpet, I cautiously dropped my legs to the floor and tiptoeing to avoid making a sound, I walked into the hallway. The bathroom door was open, the light off. I continued to pass down the steps to the kitchen. Maddie wasn't there either. Light moving beyond the small window above the sink caught my eye. I stepped into the window and peered outside. A flashlight beam danced across the ground, bobbing steadily towards the forest. I could make out 2 figures behind the light, one tall and lanky, the other short and thin. Maddie? I raced upstairs, still careful to not make a noise. I didn't want to get Maddie in trouble for leaving the house so late at night, and I threw on a pair of jeans and some wool socks in the bedroom. I stepped into pair of old boots, and grabbed a jacket from one of the hooks along the wall. A wicker basket full of assortments of odd ends, what might one need for the outside set in the corner. I reached inside my hand, quickly found a flashlight. I was off. The cold air pierced my neck and cheeks as I jogged through the now familiar woods. I slowed only as I crossed the makeshift bridge over the creek, which gurgled and ran meaninglessly above me. My flashlight illuminated the woods behind my feet and reflected the water black with night. My breath caught as it exploded out of the woods into the clearing. The treehouse loomed in front of me. I approached it for the second time. It was bigger than I remembered. The tree beneath its floor were knotted, its branches more twisted and tangled, its trunk black and thick, its roots ripping through the earth around it, stretching towards me. As a high-pitched scream filled the air, startled me into action. I recognized the voice immediately as Maddie's, and before I realized it, my feet were pushing against the hard, cold dirt, racing me forward towards the treehouse. Thrusting the flashlight into my jacket pocket to free up my hands, I grabbed the pieces of wood in front of me, and it meant to be used as ladder rungs. It was nailed to the tree trunk, and as my hands wrapped around, a piercing chill cut into my skin. I yelped in pain, but I did not let go. I reached for the next rung, and my breath caught sharply as wood seemed to cut into my hands like a knife. Pulling myself upwards was agony, but Maddie's screams kept me going. Concentrating on moving one hand in front of the other, trying to ignore the burn of the cold wrap around my legs and wrists, like trindles of the cutting wood beneath my hands. I bumped my head against the floor of the treehouse with a hard bang. The sensation quickly faded into the cacophony of pain assaulting my nerves, and I looked up. There was no discernible way to open the door towards me, so I pushed it with the other hand, holding tight to the ladder to keep my balance. The door opened a crack, and it fell hard above me. It was too heavy. Moving one foot and then the other up a rung, I pushed again, this time straightening my legs to rocket all of the force I was capable of towards the door. It swung open and fell back away from the opening with a loud crash. With one hand on each side of the opening, I pulled myself into the treehouse. I sat along the edge of the door, my feet dangling over the ground below. My breath came fast and hard with the pain radiating through me. I squeezed my eyes shut to prevent the tears from forming completely, and sucked snot back into my sinuses and down my throat. Opening my eyes began the scariest moment of my life. A stabbing pain seemed to separate my skull as I looked at two identical rooms summarized over each other at once. I felt as if my being was being pulled apart as I watched two realities play out in front of me. Both as real as the other, the closest thing I compared to is the visual mess that happens if you take off your glasses while watching a 3D movie. My stomach twisted with the sensation, and I thought I was going to be sick. Both of my tables in front of me and the sensation of two overlaid images, my eyes unable to focus on either one. The time felt like it was frozen, like a paused movie, as I looked at both scenes. And both the interior of the treehouse looked the same, as if someone wanted to recreate the sublime Hebrew of Macrogore. You usually find one in a haunted house during Halloween, but this time with real blood and viscera. The walls were reeked with red clumps of organic matter pierced with chips and splinters of bone-forming masses in the sticky substance. Raw animal pelts hung from the ceiling, tied with twine along the skull and teeth like repulsive wind chimes. The largest collection of ripped flesh and broken bones hung in the middle of the room like a grotesque mobile hung over a child's crib to create a lifetime of nightmares. A moment tickled my throat as I noticed the corpse of a cat knelt to the far wall, its paws stretched to either side, its back legs nailed one on top of the other in its hideous recreation of the crucifixion of Jesus. Around its head was a crown made of thorns. Blood flowed from where the nail bit into the wall. Dirty cloth, wet and clumped with blood, lay along the walls as shreds. The smell of wood and earth filled my nostrils, mixing with the rusty smell of blood. I focused my eyes to try and see only one image, to no avail. The scene was too muddled, but as I strained, I was able to see enough of each. Tim was on top of Maddie, his hands around her wrists, his weight pushing her down into the wood. She wiggled beneath him, crying out in pain. Her pajamas were in a pile beside her, ripped as if torn from her body. A low grunting noise was coming from Tim as he heaved up and down, and the smell of sweat mixing with the foulness of the air. It was only a moment before my eyes rejected the effort of focusing and the images blurred into each other once again. I inhaled sharply, terror burning through me as I squinted, focusing on the image behind the image. Tim was in the same position, his arm holding Maddie down against the dirty wooden floor. Above them was a shadow, almost like a shadow of a man, but the darkness of the shadow was heavy, actual matter inside of an absence of light. Its silhouette was stretching upwards, its limbs, or what I assumed were limbs, agitated downwards, towards Tim and Maddie. The shadow, thick and vicious, began to draw forward. Maddie's body twisted with her face, distortion, and as she screamed again, her voice seemed to echo against the meaty shadow. The top of it, what I thought of was a head despite the lack of any defined shape or features, came down to her mouth as the rest of the being laid over her. Tim continued to hold her down, allowing the beast, for that is what it was, to lay on top of her and to enter her. The smell of cedar filled my nose, accompanied by an earthy wet scent. Not the scent of dirt, but of burning rubber. I recognized it as tar. The scent burned my delicate skin inside my nostrils and assaulted my back of my throat. My head began to hurt, looking at double image, and I felt nauseous, a different type of nauseous than I was used to. I wasn't accompanied by an urge to vomit, but instead my brain spun as if it were a rogue merry-go-round. Now that I'm older, I realize the sensation was the same as drinking too much, too fast. I swallowed, pushing my mind forward through the haze and the spinning. Finding a more solid mental footing, I breathed deep and lunged forward into Tim. Startled, he fell to the floor. Maddie was crying, blood stained her thighs. I grabbed her and pulled her down with me. We collapsed out of the trap door and fell to the hard ground. I heard a sickening snap, and my stomach dropped with a sound. I stood, and it fell again. My ankle was screaming with pain. Maddie, standing naked beside me, grabbed my arm and pulled me up over her shoulder. Using her as a support, we ran towards my house. As we left the clearing, I turned my head to see Tim climbing down the ladder, his pants hanging loosely around his thighs, as he held them up with one hand and the other falling to the rung below him, holding his weight as his feet hopped down to the ground. The tips of the grass was white with the first frost of the season. Turned back to the forest before us, the bridge over the creek was only a few feet away. We were slow, but steady. Tim's angry cries rose behind us, but we didn't slow. The bridge was grown with our weight, the wood too narrow for Maddie and I to walk next to each other. We had to rotate. Maddie first, me still holding onto her weight, using her as a crutch, sideways facing the openness of the rumbling stream. Maddie stepped cautiously forward as I hopped beside her. As Maddie's bare feet touched to the other side, I felt the cut tree trunk sag with an additional weight. Tim's pants were fastened around his waist again, leaving his hands unhindered. They reached me for greedily. As I screamed, my godfoot slipped under me and I fell on the narrow bridge, hitting my tailbone hard. My broken ankle dangled uselessly over the side of the bridge. The sharp pain radiated with a shudder up my spine. Tears in my eyes, I looked up at Tim, who loomed over me, his face twisted into a deranged smile. His prey had fallen, and he had the upper hand. His eyes were bulging with circles of white, red, and brown. His hair stuck up in odd angles, and his chest heaved with excited breath. He reached a hand down to me, and I closed my eyes. Before his fingers could tighten over my shoulder, I heard a dead thunk. I opened my eyes just in time to see Tim land with a yell to the water below us. Behind me, Maddie stood, breathing hard, a large branch in her hands. Her face was set in pure hatred. She looked down at me and extended her hand. I grabbed it, and together we stumbled to the house. The next few weeks were a blur. Tim was sent to the hospital with hypothermia, and I was wrapped in a cast for my broken ankle. Once he recovered, he was taken into police custody. Maddie and I had to testify against him. We had to describe what he had done to us in all its brutal detail, but I never mentioned the black shape, the beast in the treehouse, and the magic spell it had cast over my eyes and mind. The case was simple, open and shut, as they say on crime shows. Maddie came to live with me and my parents after the trial. Mrs. Harris was devastated that her eldest son was sent to jail, even though his sentence was only for a few years, and Maddie felt herself alienated from her family and her home. I avoided discussing that night with Maddie. I wanted to ask her why she went with Tim in the first place, and I still wanted to ask about it. I don't know, but I know it doesn't matter. All that matters is what happened in the treehouse. I'm 16 now. Maddie tried to commit suicide last year and is now living in a special home for troubled teens. I hadn't seen her in months. My last memory is her pale face looking out at me from her window at the house. The trademark black eyeliner and dark purple lipstick, making her look like a drowned corpse under the crystal water, searching for me, for help that I could never provide, for healing that I could never be. Tim was released and is now living back with Mrs. Harris. He's on the sex offenders list, but it doesn't seem like enough. They say he won't come after me, that I'm safe, but I don't feel safe. Since that night, I dream of Mr. Itch a lot. The dark shadow beast, his arms reaching for me as I'm frozen to the floor in fear, unable to tear myself away or even look anywhere but his dark, faceless head. I wake up most nights screaming. My mother comes in and hugs me, hushing me and telling me it's okay, letting me calm down in her reassuring grasp. Last night, though, as Mr. Itch bent down, his shadowy presence only inches from my face, his body hovering just above my own, he changed. The slinky wet mask shifted and morphed into a human. At first, I thought I was seeing Tim, that it was those hands that will haunt me forever, reaching, grasping, holding me down. But that face was older, much older, even older than Tim would be now. The face was harsh, a thick, rust brown beard barely brushing against my chin. It was Mr. Harris, Maddie's dad. My memories of her home came back with a new focus, a focus that included a large, portly man, his face stained red with alcohol and fatty foods, his nose wide, his skin greasy. Mr. Harris, the quiet father, sitting at the end of the dining room table, an open beer can beside him, the father who disappeared during Tim's trial, the father who no one's seen in years, the roofer, the man who always smelt of cedar and tar. Okay, that had a surprise ending and kind of left on a cliffhanger, but also not. And that's the thing that I like but also hate at the same time, is whenever something leaves on a cliffhanger but also doesn't. So this was not the longest thing ever. It's not as long as one of, say, the Has Anyone Heard of the Left Right Game episodes things, but it was longer, a lot longer than Portal ended up being, which was definitely disappointing. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel.